Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Ashley Barlow Company podcast. I'm Ashley Barlow, your host. If you are a parent, a teacher, or someone who works at a school, or you're a community member, a volunteer, or a staff member at an organization that supports people with special education plans, a coach, a tutor, or even a grandparent, you're in the right place. Sit back with an ice-cold glass of lemonade, put on your walking shoes and grab some headphones, roll down the windows and cruise. Ready, set, go. Educate, advocate, collaborate.
Hello, Rachel. How are you?
Good. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you. I am so excited to have you here. This is our 200th episode celebration where we are celebrate. We're inviting back my audience's favorite guests. And wouldn't you believe that it also turns out that I'm talking to my favorite people. So I know. Come on, you can. So happy to have you back. Let's start for folks that didn't hear your first episode. We will of course link it, but why don't you just do a little introduction for us?
Sure. My name is Dr. Rachel Schwartz, officially. I'm a former special educator, a behavior analyst. I work for the Watson Institute in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania as a consultant and trainer, which means that I go to disability organizations and schools and I support students, programs, help to brainstorm about programs, basically anything that would assist individuals with disabilities to be more successful and the people and professionals who work with them to feel more successful and have more successful outcomes. And it can look a lot of different ways, but that's what I do. I write, I do something like this, like professional conversations with you, which is always lovely, and just really try to both help individuals within the field, self-advocates within the field, and people who are new to the field just learn more about it.
Well, and you do it so well. I mean, there's just something about the way that you can get down to the heart of it so efficiently and respectfully. So I'm certain that that's why people really appreciated our first chat. And today we're going to talk about something that I've actually had a lot of cases that have involved this topic, which is complex interfering behaviors. And so we're gonna talk about complex interfering behaviors. We're going to define them. We're going to talk about what we can do, how we can advocate for strategies and skills and supports to help kids. Why don't we start with just kind of like walking through what we mean when we say complex interfering behaviors? What is that?
Sure. So there's not really an official definition, but this is how I describe it, which is these are behaviors that are chronic, that have not shown to improve over time despite having intervention and despite having goals around them, IEP meetings around them. We're still not getting to a level that we would consider acceptable or progress is really being made. And these are one for which those typical strategies just haven't really worked. And by typical strategies, those are those environmental adaptations. Those are maybe making some staff changes or staff tweaks or working on the rapport. That might be relooking at the groupings and all of those pieces that are very typical. When you look at those SDIs, you're like, okay, let's just go through that list. Did we do it? Did we do it? Did we do it? And these are those behaviors that just do not budge despite our best efforts.
Yeah. And what I think is really important to note here is that we aren't necessarily talking about the intensity of the behavior. We're really talking more about the duration, like the length of success and implementation of any strategy.
Exactly. Like if you, for an example, I'm not talking about a kid who, punches another kid once every 3 months. Okay, this is that kid. We can work on that in isolation. I'm talking about the kid who every day in class puts his head down and refuses to do work. So it might not seem as intense, but that's actually a more, in my view, complex behavior because it's happening daily and we haven't seen movement. The behavior hasn't budged.
Yeah. And they are frustrating. That's super frustrating to try to figure out because you're like, gosh, what could we do? We tried kind of everything in our toolbox. And so what do we do? So walk us through kind of like when you see something, you go into a school and the school says, okay, we've got a kid that's putting their head down on the table. And of course, it could be something that's more significant, right? Like a lot of times in my case, it's elopement. They
Right.
try
Yes. Big one.
everything they can try. And this child still is dangerously eloping, like out of the school or out of the classroom and fast. Another one that happens to me is like just complete shutdown. It might be head on the desk, but it might be like not answering a darn thing. Are you okay? Blank stare.
Yeah.
So, it could be more significant thing. Well, it could be clearing the classroom, it could,
Oh, yeah. It could be all the above. I mean, that could be, but yeah, it can be all of those things. And I think what's really tricky when you have cases like this is everyone's done all the things. So you have also adult burnout, which is a total separate issue. But what most of the time you've gone through your checklist of, well, we've done a behavior assessment. So we've looked at all these things, but yet still we're not seeing these improvements. And it's really difficult in those cases to suddenly say, okay, well, I think we have to pull back. I would say like pulling back to the wide lens. At this point, we've been in the micro because sometimes we focus so deep in all that nitty gritty that we kind of forget we need to pull back and just look at what do we know? Like as a field, what do we know? And, the scientific method works. And usually the more you just dig in to the microscope, the less clear it becomes. So we have to pull back. And so this can look a lot of different ways. I mean, one way you just described the shutdown, and I'm going to go on a side quest for a second, which is one way is understanding the way your brain works. So when a kid's logical brain goes out the window, right? It goes out the window when they're starting to get that fight or flight or freeze response or fib for some kids. You're suddenly like, okay, my body, I don't feel safe. I don't know this. I don't know the answers to this. I'm starting to get stressed out. And suddenly that logical brain has shut down. And so their emotional brain's in control. And when the emotional brain's in control, they cannot do anything with logic. So the more we try to talk, the more we try to say, hey, start this, here's a first thing. If you do this, then you can do that. You can make a choice. They're just not open for business. And it is so important as practitioners to catch them on that preventative side, but it's very hard to do. And often we're so used to being like, oh, there they go again. And I'm not saying that in a mean way. I've done that too, because it is frustrating when you work with someone, their head's down, they're not responding. But it's important to remember at this point, they do not have the ability to have logic. So there's like one piece there, and that's just the brain and how our, cortisol and serotonin and all that fun stuff works.
Yeah. And what I think also is important is then that strategy for that. Like once they've gone over the hump, right? Like I remembered I had a student that was on my caseload, legal caseload. I then worked with him because I did reading tutoring to explore reading because I just can't stop learning. And I worked with him, should not work as an advocate because I can't be as attorney. And we were remote. And like my instinct told me that what I should do is get close. Like, okay, I'm not going to teach him anything. There's no reason. I need to connect. I need to build relationship here. What ended up working? We were remote, like we were on deep. So I was like, all right, no go noodle, gonna bring this back. Like, what do I do? He would put his head in a shirt. I started putting my head in my shirt. I made sure I had on a long enough shirt. I'd put my head in my shirt and I'd be like, what are we gonna do? Oh my gosh, let's take a break. And now with him, I could be silly. With other people, that would be mocking. And that started to work. Like me going into his space remotely started to work. I think it was relationship building, but I don't really know. I mean,
it is also that redirection, refocus. It's not the demand. It's sort of like, hey, let's just pull back to this sort of silly thing. So suddenly his brain has something to focus on that isn't the request, it's the demand. And maybe it is the relationship, maybe it is the humor. I mean, everyone wants to feel cared for and everyone wants to feel like someone likes them. So to have someone, instead of just being obviously frustrated with them, but instead is willing to go there with them, I am sure that that was a powerful connection for that student.
I had them the other day. I saw him and I was like, am I still as beautiful and still as funny as ever? And he didn't respond. So, I mean, I assume that's a yes.
It has to be a yes, right? Take it as a yes. It wasn't.
But I told him, I was like, if you want ice cream and next time I see you in person, you better say yes. Oh, you know, I think that, what would we do? Like, what do we do when a child starts to exhibit that behavior? Let's talk about maybe like trying to catch it at the beginning.
Yes. So, yeah, let's go back to like that wide lens. So, before you talk strategies, we have to look at our knowns. So we look at our like our reinforcers, okay? And that is, I know everyone's like, ugh, reinforcers. We're just going back into that talk, but this is that is because usually it's not what you want that is the problem. It's just usually that behavior of wanting is the issue, right? So it's not that like wanting attention isn't a problem. Wanting to escape a task isn't a problem. It's that behavior that wanting causes in that context that is the problem. Yeah. So we're not trying to say you can't get these things, but often what we don't think about is the efforts we're asking them to exhibit worth it for this thing? Because often in school we say if you just do the thing that we ask you to do, then you'll be able to take a little break with Legos, be able to go to recess. But sometimes that's just not worth it. So we have to look at, is the reinforcement, is the magnitude great enough to match the effort? Is the reinforcer, whatever that is, escape attention? And I'll be honest, usually in schools, it's all of the things. It's really hard for that to be distilled down. So is that dangerous? You talked about elopement. Like that particular form of escape actually can be dangerous. So at that point, that wanting behavior has turned into access of something that you're like, okay, you can't go outside right now.
Yeah.
So thinking just
about danger really quick. This is something when I was thinking about you this morning, I was like, this is something I want to ask Dr. Rachel about. So, okay. What sometimes I see in my own house with my friends and with my clients that a child will have a behavior that's consistent. You know, it's something that they do a lot. Let's say it's like throwing shoes. And it'll get overlooked several times. Like the shoes get thrown, the shoes get thrown, the shoes get thrown. The shoes get thrown and they hit the little brother and everybody loses their minds. And then you get the consequence. And I feel like the problem isn't that they hit a little brother. I get so much communication from school. Not with my own kid anymore, thank God, but from clients, it's like he threw a shoe and it hit a kid. And I had to call that kid's parent. And I'm like, the problem is the shoe throwing, right? It's not the consequence of it. That's an actual consequence, which should impact the behavior analysis. But the actual problem is the shoe throwing, not the fact it hit them in this particular time.
Yeah, that is right. So the problem is, because what you're describing is that's like that is the secondary thing. Like even if you were saying, I'm throwing the shoe to hit another person, the hitting is the consequent event. The throwing is the behavior. That is the behavior that you intervene on. And that's the thing you try to figure out. What is it like? Yeah, maybe you're just like, I'm really sick of hearing that kid talk. And so your way of stopping them talking is doing this. Or it's really fun because adults get really big. I love to push their buttons and nothing pushes their buttons more than that.
Well, but and it's also like, you know, I've got a kid that loves to do things for shits and giggles. You know, because here, right?
Yeah,
yes. Like the kids does weekend. And so attention, it's all attention, right? So he loves that when the shoe occasionally hits somebody, everybody loses their minds. And then the like immature thing in his mind also is like, well, sometimes I throw the shoe and nobody cares. Sometimes I get this big reaction. So I'm going to keep pushing.
And of course,
keep
doing it.
Yeah. Okay.
Because the reinforcer for that, like shoe throwing is not super effortful, probably. Like at the end of the day, it's like it's easy. It's easier than putting on a shoe. And if it results in somebody helping you, because suddenly they get your shoes and they help you, if it results in a peer giving you attention, an adult giving you attention, and also we always get this big thing of like, well, I reprimanded them. Who cares? For my kid, I swear, the more angry I get, the more he's like like excited he gets, the more he's just like, you can't. And it's like that funny anger where you're like, don't mad at me. I'm just gonna so yeah, I think that so really thinking about that reinforcement, and not just from a checkbox way, but being very thoughtful about, what is the reinforcer for this? Does the effort match? And then on that other side, thinking about and remember, reinforcement's a dynamic and living, breathing thing. So it changes all the time. So you might do an initial assessment, say, I think it's this. It can ebb and flow every day, depending on what's happening that day. You may have been, maybe you come to school, you had a really hard morning with your parents, you've already gotten yelled at or whatever. So teacher reprimands are not really something you're going for today. But you might be into I just really want to get out of the classroom, and this is a surefire way to do it. So that is dynamic, and it's important to look at it. And so not just look at it as a checkbox, but look at it as what are we seeing? Let's really look at the patterns, what the expectation is, because everyone expects, just because we say we want you to engage in this replacement behavior, that kids, we teach them once, they're just going to do it. And they're not going to do it. Sometimes they do, but very, very rarely does that happen.
Right.
And
the replacement behavior has to be easier.
So it has to be easier.
If you're pulling hair or running out of the classroom, well, that's probably two separate things. But if you're pulling hair,
you might get out of the classroom, though. It might be like you're being mean. Get out for a skate.
It might be. Okay, so let's say you're pulling hair for a skate. Well, if you want to escape, then you have to have something that it's super easy for you to be able to escape. And it probably, with a lot of kids, has to be nonverbal. So maybe it's an escape button, maybe it's a card they hold out, maybe it's a
tap this by the window, or tap this by the door. They have to, that has to be available for them. And every person wants a kid to work for it. They think, well, they have to work for this. And no kid can until they've established that they can get it kind of more for free. They can get it for doing something less. And then you can shape and you can build up. But, the other component of that is sometimes we pick out replacement behaviors without ever doing skill assessments on, do they even have that skill or a prerequisite skill? We have to, whenever there's a chronic interfering behaviors, or these complex interfering behaviors, there is undoubtedly a ton of skill deficits that are a part of that. Where are the latest skills assessment, and not just the Vineland, the academic, whatever you're doing, your ABLES, whatever it is, where is the latest skill assessment? Because we are asking them to do something that clearly they don't have enough competence in. And that is going to be where you're having to really look at your teaching, because there's no way you're going to be able to change a kid's behavior without changing 5 different things. I mean, you're going to have to focus on, let's say, the elopement. It's not just teaching them one thing in order to get them to escape. You're teaching that. You're teaching them other ways. So maybe another communication, but you're also trying to build up their ability to engage appropriately with people, because maybe they hair pull, maybe they aggress. You're teaching them to stop when you say stop. So there's 5 or 6 different behaviors that you're working on for that one behavioral goal or plan. And if you can be hyper vigilant with those 6 behaviors you're working on, then you're going to see that change. But usually we just kind of go, well, let's change the reinforcement. Well, let's make them do a first then, and then they'll get access to escape. They do not have the skills. They're not ready. Those complex kids are not ready.
Okay, so we look at reinforcements. We teach when we can. We try to teach replacement behaviors, and we offer replacement behaviors.
Yep, do a skills assessment. You'll have to do a skill. Yep.
You've got to do that skills assessment. And we continue to look at it more broadly. We aren't Okay, you have to stay in your defined area. Here's your tape. Stay in here. You got to stay right here. Like,
Yeah.
but not to well,
Who likes to feel like a caged animal?
can't stand the tape on the floor. I'm like,
I waited too. I've never seen a kid look at that visual cue and think, "Oh, okay, this is where I stay," and feel like okay about it. I mean, sometimes I want to be like everybody. Again, pull back. Look at what you're doing. Is
right.
like what are we doing, folks? I mean, in the other parts of like the preventative or antecedent, whatever language you want to use, we also, on top of the kind of skills, I mean, adult interactions, peer interactions. Um, yeah, we're looking at the task requirements. Again, do those meet the actual skills this person has? Do they need more prerequisite skills? A lot of schools, he talks about reading instruction. Like, you know, eh, can they, do they need pull out? Do they need small groups? Do they need one on one? What is it that we need to give them? And then there's the environmental structure. Some of it is the way I mean, a lot of times, this is more elementary, but we really ask kids to sit and listen at their desk, and it's not normal for that age group. Kids are not naturally inclined or hardwired to sit and listen. It's just, it's going to be really hard. And just because some kids can do it really well, we should not forget that that is not really how we as humans are meant to learn.
Yeah.
And
How
so
we
it's,
should learn. Yeah.
yeah. So you've got these elopers who are like, get me out of here. I can't do this.
Right.
Sometimes that means like, yeah, traditional schooling is really hard. We haven't evolved in a way that works for neurodivergent learners. We're getting better. There's more flexible seeing, more seeing-ness, but the heart of how we teach and what we do is really not meant for anyone who learns outside of that kind of average quartiles, whatever.
And what's so unfortunate about that is I am finding that the more project-based learning classes deal and the more curricula that are developed that are project-based, the busier classrooms are, which then provides less structure and is way more confusing in neurodivergent learners. So you would think this like hands-on science where you're feeling it, or even the math programs that like unbox math and then you put it back together as like math function, or like calculation. I am finding that is confusing to my clients, and teachers are saying, oh yeah, my classroom is busy and we're going from center to center. But I think it's the lack of structure.
I think so too. And I was going to say in that too, like that's where our classrooms, and sometimes with those complex kids too, our classrooms have just been programmed to be aversive. Whether it's us as the adults, whether it's the work itself, whether it's how it's structured, whatever it is, like, if we have been the aversives, it is really hard to suddenly be like, oh, now we're going to pair ourselves and make us this like kind of reinforcing thing for you. So you want to stay here. It's the older kids get, the harder that becomes. Like we're still fighting that battle.
Well, okay, so I see that too. You've said 3 things in the last 4 minutes that like summarize my 2 hardest cases with kids with interfering behaviors. So, in a couple of them, it has been an academic deficit. Reading has been huge. I say reading and behavior are the 2 biggest impediments to inclusive education that I see.
Yes. Yep.
And so, which is why I did the deep dive on reading. But in a couple of them, we've done a deep dive on reading and we've been like, it's actually not reading. But because the kids can't say, I am frustrated because, it's important to go down that deep dive. Another one that you didn't say the word, but you hinted at it, is the sensory integration, particularly interoception. Are you seeing a lot of kids that are struggling with feeling their feelings, identifying their feelings?
I mean, that is the population it's like we often work with. And I will say it's funny because I've been sort of pulling out of, zones and those sort of things, which I've always loved and used. I'm pulling out of a lot of the feeling identification because half the kids I work with will be able to be like, oh yeah, that's mad, that's happy, that's this, and be able to point it out. But no one can do it when they're starting to feel it.
Right.
And so that's where that brain discussion, like Flooded, Laura de Thales work, if I'm pronouncing her name right? And there's other, just that idea of this is how we actually talk about your brain. So it's not you feeling this way. It's that darn brain of yours that's just being like that darn brain, that cortisol is rising. And that's the thing that's making you act this way, and helping to pull it out. Because I have found more and more kids, especially at the elementary level, almost incapable of going deeper with, especially even after they've come down, even after they're more regulated, being able to go back and discuss their feelings, being able to go back and identify and consequence map all these things that I think successfully have been able to do maybe a little bit before, but or maybe we just weren't pushing as hard. I'm not really sure, but I feel like nowadays, I have just stopped even trying to mention the feelings. Like, I've just stopped
Who
even
wants
going
to?
to.
I mean, who wants to really talk about their feelings? Like we had a hilarious thing in our family happen where we were talking about a grown up and how a grown up, like we were trying to help a friend or a family member or something through something, and I was like, oh, I just couldn't get through to him. And then I was telling my husband about something with my son, and I said, well, how do you think that made you feel? And he was like, well, he's just like his whoever, I'm talking feeling. Good. And I'm like, exactly, that is a completely human experience to not want to talk about your feelings. So, yeah.
And also, for a lot of these kids, too, when you're finally over that hump and you're starting to come down and your logical brain's starting to come back to you, you will feel, a lot of kids feel shame very strongly. Like there's been more and more research out for kids with ADHD that have interfering behaviors who actually have a shame response that rides really high. And so they interpret a lot of the interactions with teachers, a lot of things as being a shameful moment when it might not have been, the teacher might not have been intending to shame, but a lot of their responses have that. And so if you feel shame, it makes you less likely to want to engage. It makes you less likely to want to continue. And I think, like, for some of our learners who are verbal, who sometimes go under the radar and we get a little bit of like, well, they know it, they're just not doing it. Some of those kids, those are the ones that I'm like, they've got high shame responses and that is impacting their ability. That's where you get school avoidance. I think then that spirals into some school avoidance and all of that.
Or the punky teenage boy that like body checks the teacher on the way out the door.
Oh, yeah.
That's shame.
Yeah, it is. It is. Ross Green, who I love, kids will do well when they can. Like if they can, and often they can't. And it is very helpful for those complex kids to remember it, because we often think about that for those kids with ODD who are just, we're having to really rethink how we work with kids who are so comfortable in conflict. But for our nonverbal learners, for our learners who are more impacted, I think that the same thing applies. They will do this if they can. So obviously they can't the way we have set up our learning space.
Right.
And so however you set up those contingencies, even if it's based on your FBA, even if you feel solid, if the data hasn't changed, you haven't got it. It ain't it. We got to move back and completely rego. And I always say, like, start with that reinforcement, start with this, because those are the core pillars of your plan. Let's go ahead and start with our knowns. If you rework all of those, if those skill deficits, if you're looking at that, reassessing, you should be able to find a somewhat clearer path. It might not mean immediate change, but it will be much more informed than that initial assessment.
I'll tell you what, I mean, it's brilliant. What about, okay, so then the piece here that's missing for me, I think the only missing piece is the darn grown-ups who either are stuck in this like old school sentiment that the problem is the kid, or that they're not motivated, or that they have to work for something. But how do we get adults to help create this sense of belonging, this sense of community, this sense of this empathy?
Hello, Ashley. I feel like, because the problem with all of this is when you have these complex kids, you have adult burnout. So you have adults who cannot regulate their own emotions around hard kids, and they can't do it. And so the kid can't do it. I believe every person, every teacher goes to their job wanting to do the best. I have to believe that. No one wakes up wanting to screw over a child. However, I will say it's really complicated when you work with people, and especially people who aren't acting rationally, especially people who are not behaving in the way you're like, if only you just did this. And so when you have these dysregulated adults, I mean, I have said before, like, is this the role that you think they should be with them? I mean, this is where I'm like, do we need to team switch? Do you need to go? Like, what do we need to do? Because as much training as we do, which is still great, continue to build that knowledge base for the teachers. There's going to be teachers who cannot handle that kid.
Yeah.
And at that point, it's like, you need to have a shift. Then we shift them over. I mean, continual training for teachers, continual work on their burnout. Their jobs are really tough. And they just become tougher, and they don't feel like it's a profession that's given the respect it deserves. And it's definitely not given the resources it deserves. So I say all of this with that, it's really hard with a complex kid because you might just have paras that are in charge of really like running that kid's day. And those paras don't get paid enough to do what they're supposed to be doing and teaching. So part of this is a broken system. We can train the adults. We can partner with the adults. The more training they have, the better. But it doesn't always mean they're going to be able to do it with that kid, which is just one of those questions of, do we have to switch teams? Do we need to switch content? Do we need to do a 15-minute rotation so that like no one gets tired when it's hard? I mean, sometimes it's just that creative. I mean, if I could, anyone who's getting into training and consultation, it's like the kids are never the hard part. They're the interesting and the fun part. Managing the adults and managing the expectations of the adults is the hardest part.
Yeah. I found a lot of success with finding an adult that speaks my language. Like you've mentioned, avoidance.
Yes.
Demand avoidance in schools. Like sometimes, like the old school teachers are going to be like, well, nobody wants to do a job. And I'm like, well, demand avoidance is a little different. But if you find like a young behaviorist.
Yes. And someone who's like, it's not my way or the highway. Like that old school, like you say it because you do it because I say it. I'm the adult. Show me the respect I deserve, which I think I just said to my child the other day. I was like, I need you to show some respect. Oh.
Yeah. I made the mistake of always saying why to my kids, like, don't eat the plant because plants could be toxic, or don't whatever because, and now my kids always expect a reason. And sometimes the answer is just plain no, because I don't feel like doing it.
I know. And it's hard. And that's where I'm like, what you also just brought up too is the other thing of when we're trying to work with these adults, it's just that teaming, like the families and everyone. And it's really hard when you don't trust each other to be on that. But man, like that is when you've got these chronic behaviors, because it's really hard if you guys have that lack of trust. But that's going to happen if you feel like, well, what are you doing? What are you doing? You get to finger pointing. And I know that's the world often.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I mean, I think that you have provided teams with so many ideas to think about here, so many resources. Of course, those Ross Green books are great. Flooded, I will put in the show notes. That book changed so much about how I think about these situations and those students.
I did a training with her 2 months ago, and it was just helpful to kind of think, because I don't always work with kids who are going to articulate, be able to engage necessarily in every single activity and the resources she has on her website. But that idea, it depersonalizes what's going on. And it's just helpful. I feel like that's so helpful for everyone to remember this has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
Most of the time, nobody is thinking about you, the teacher, or you, the students. They're just engaging because of all this other stuff that's going on in their mind, all these other factors that we haven't quite pieced together well yet.
Yeah. Well, that's the way it should be. I mean, the only other thing, I guess you don't interact with the kids as often anymore, do you?
No, I do actually. Yeah. I do. I try to be present, so I'm not just someone who comes in and says, "Oh, you should do da 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 da," and leave. Like, I try to sit with kids and know the classrooms and know what's going on, so I'm not just offering a piece of advice and piecing out. I think
Right.
that's
That's right. Well, of course. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, but I think it's good. Yeah, I like to try to sit with them, so at least when I say something, I can be like, "Oh, I don't know. I've got to like go back and really think about this."
Right. Yeah. Like, their personalities and that sort of thing. Because the other thing that I think helps with that belonging, of course, like having a trusted adult for the kids is great. And if I am one of those trusted adults, or if their parent, have given me enough insight, then a lot of times what I think is helpful is for the kids to understand, like, you were able to work through this with me because we used the strategy that we agreed on, and you were able to access your reinforcer, and you had the skills that you needed. Look at how these strategies helped you, etc. But Mrs. So-and-so in the cafeteria, you know how she is. And so, buddy, I'm sorry that it's this way, but the fact of the matter is you might have to work a little harder in the cafeteria. So what can we do to before cafeteria when you have your safe person available to you?
Right.
What can you do with Miss Jessica before you go to the cafeteria to help you to prepare for the Wicked Witch of the West that's in there, or that environment that we can't fix, or whatever it is? I think sometimes like cutting to the chase with kids when you're able to
Yep. Yep.
has really helped, because then they can help to be a part of the problem. Like, it still is going to involve skills that they need.
Well, and what you're bringing up is really, I am against any plan that will eliminate or attempts to eliminate all aversives, because that's not the world. And we're going to have to develop that skill at some point. So we're really trying to cope with aversives and develop that coping. Again, it's like part of your 5 to 10 skills you're working on, but you have to cope with the people who don't feel necessarily like safe or secure people for you. And you're going to have to go. It means that maybe you don't do it. Maybe they're not the go-to person you're with for an hour, but maybe they are someone who you do 15 minutes with at recess and then another 15 minutes later in the day. That's just, we have to be able to do that, because coping is, you will not be able to be independent if you cannot cope with things that are not ideal for you. And that's one of the greatest skills. So we don't have to do it all at once. That's the saying, well, you have to deal with it now in all the hard things, but we can't just eliminate. We have to work on it. Slow steps.
So good. Rachel, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. It was lovely chatting with you. As always.
As always.